welcome to our first lesson in Chapter 10. For this chapter, we're going to be focusing on trigonometry. And trigonometry, its most basic definition, is the study of triangles, their sides, and angles. So our learning targets for this chapter, for this lesson, are that at the end of this lesson screencast, you will be able to solve right triangle trig problems. You will be able to sketch the graphs of sine, cosine, and tangent, and you will be able to define the term periodic function and know the periods and periodic properties of sine, cosine, and tangent. You need to have these learning targets written down in your notes. Alright, so let's start with a review of right triangle trig. Okay, so the hypotenuse is probably the easiest one to explain because it's constant. It is always across from the 90-degree angle. This is the hypotenuse. Here's our 90-degree angle. Directly across from it is the hypotenuse. Directly across from the right angle here is the hypotenuse. Okay. The ones that are variable are the adjacent side and the opposite side, and those depend on what angle you're using. So for instance, if I choose to use this angle and we'll call it x, my opposite side is opposite of this angle. So that would mean that this is my opposite side and this is my adjacent side. Okay? But if for some reason we decided to use a different angle, because maybe we needed it, and we used angle y, well, this is no longer my opposite side. For angle y, my opposite side is where x's adjacent angle is, and the adjacent side for angle y is the opposite side of angle x. So when we use the words adjacent and opposite, you have to know what angle you're using. So for instance, if I'm using this acute angle here, okay, I know that my opposite side is directly across and my adjacent side is right here. Okay? So you may be wondering why we're using the terms hypotenuse, adjacent, and opposite if you don't remember trig, and we'll get to that because there's some handy little ratios that we're going to use to help us solve. So let's go ahead and have a quick review of our trig properties, and then we'll talk about where those opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse sides come into play. So there's actually 6 trig properties. Okay, the first 3 that are in yellow are the ones that you've seen before. They're sine, cosine, and tangent. Okay, we abbreviate sine as sin, but we would never say the sin of, we would always say the sine of. Okay, cosine is abbreviated as cos, and again, we don't say cos, we say cosine. And tangent's kind of the one we abbreviate as tangent, and people say tan instead of tangent, and that's fine, but you know, most likely we would want to say tangent. Okay. Alright, the other 3 properties are, we're not going to get to them in this chapter, but I want you to know that they exist, and those are the secant, the cosecant, and the cotangent. Okay? So here are where the sides come into play. So for sine, you guys have maybe seen this acronym, SOHCAHTOA, right? Have you seen that in the past? This is kind of a little mnemonic device that helps us remember our ratios. So refers to sine, okay? So that means the sine of x, or some angle, is equal to the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. Okay, so here's where those sides come into play. Alright, the C has to do with cosine. So the cosine of some angle, and we'll call it x, is equal to, well, A stands for the adjacent side, divided by h, which is the hypotenuse. And finally, tangent. Okay, so tangent of some angle is equal to the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. Alright, so basically, both sine and cosine utilize the hypotenuse, whereas tangent does not. So it's the only one that doesn't use the hypotenuse when you're trying to calculate using that property. So let's go ahead and put these into action, and I'm not spending a whole lot of time on this because you've seen this in the past, so I don't kind of want to focus on something that you've done already and you know. So this is just a quick review. Okay, so first of all, we have a triangle. It's a right angle. There's a 39-degree angle here, and we know a side length of 8. Your goal is to find all side lengths, okay? So let's call this side X, and we'll call this side Y. Okay, so I think the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to find side Y. So basically, I need to use this 39-degree angle, okay, I have an opposite side. And if I'm starting by solving for side Y, I also have the hypotenuse because Y is directly across from my 90-degree angle. So here's how I set this up. Opposite over hypotenuse. So that's sine. So I'm going to say the sine of 39 degrees, because that's my angle, is equal to my opposite side, which is 8, over my hypotenuse, which is y. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by y. So I have y times the sine of 39 degrees equals 8. And now I'm going to divide off the sine of 39 degrees. By the way, just as a reminder from your other trig classes, you cannot break up sine and 39 degrees. They are attached together, okay? They don't ever separate. All right, so that goes away here. So now we know that y is equal to 8 divided by the sine of 39 degrees. So I should also mention at this point that for this entire chapter, we're going to be using degrees. So calculators have two modes when we use trig. One is in degrees and one is in radians. You want to make sure that your calculator is in degrees, otherwise you're going to get incorrect answers, okay? So go ahead and at this point check and make sure that you're in degree mode, okay? Alright, so when you put this in your calculator, 8 divided by sine of 39 degrees, you get about 8.3, alright? So our hypotenuse is about 8.3 in length. Okay, units in length. Okay, we still have another side to find, and you might think, well, I could just use Pythagorean theorem to do this. That's true. I think using the trig property is a little faster. So in this case, I'm going to use a different color so we can see. I need to find x. So again, I'm using the 39 degrees, so I still have my opposite side, but I'm not going to use my hypotenuse because, well, I would have all the values I need, so I'm going to use the adjacent side because that's what I'm trying to find. So anytime you're finding something, you need to actually have that variable in your trig equation. So opposite and hypotenuse, that is tangent. So I'm going to use the tangent of 39 degrees, and that equals the opposite side, which is 8, over the adjacent side, which is x. So again, same idea, we multiply both sides by x, and we end up with x times the tangent of 39 degrees, and it equals 8. I'm going to divide by tangent of 39 degrees on both sides. Okay? So that means that x equals 8 divided by the tangent of 39 degrees. When I put this into my calculator, I get about 2.21. So I have 2.21 as my side length here. So at this point, if a problem asked me to find the perimeter, I could definitely add all of these sides together and state the perimeter. Alright, so just as practice, I would like you, for part of the screencast, is I want you to find, oh, I should have given you a length, so let me give you a length. We'll call AB 22 in length. I want you to find A and B. So put this in your notes. Make sure you can solve for A and B in your homework tonight. All right.